about 20 metres by 20 metres. When Tom actually decided the coals would need to investigate, they put about 10 tanks of water on it and pretty much washed everything into the sea just about. So I got there and said, well, why did you bother calling me? You've just wasted all our time. So I can't do anything with that scene. So it's probably something we need to do better is get that message out about what our first responders can do to help us, and some things we don't want them to do that makes our job fairly hard. So we'll go through a few of those things tonight. I might try and touch base if we have time as we go through the night to just show you some of the things that we use, little tricks of trade that we use to help us track down, first of all, the origin of fire, and then hopefully the cause of it, the source of ignition, and who is actually responsible, the agency responsible, not being a government agency, but actually the agency is in the cause, and whether it's been accidental, negligence, or been deliberately lit. And that was pretty much when I started, that's all we did. But after Black Saturday, we went further than that, and we went on to tracking the path of the fire, the direction of travel, the rate of spread of it, and any contributing factors. So we pretty much did a reconstruction of it for the Royal Commission. And the impact of it as well, so the lives and property loss, damage that was undertaken there, and any contributing factors. So for those who can remember the 2009 fires, where the Murrindindi Mill fire was originally thought to be deliberately lit, and that fire went on through Nabathong and into Marysville, and I can't remember a lot of lives. I think it was 70-something lives were lost actually in that fire. So, if a person is actually charged for lighting that fire, they get charged, with arson causing death by the number of people who actually were killed in it. So, but we had when that fire started, we pretty much knew where it started. Topic back to Marysville, it's a long way away, so we actually have to try and make that link. And I know when we go to a criminal court, we have to prove everything beyond reasonable doubt to get a successful prosecution. So it'd be pretty easy for the defence to say, well, how can you prove that fire that started at Murrindindi Mill, or near the Murrindindi Mill, is the same fire that burnt through to Marysville, which was perhaps 40, 50 kilometres away? So we have to be able to link that all the way through, because I could say, well, how do you know there wasn't a lightning strike, or there was a car accident somewhere along the way, or somebody was having a illegal barbecue that started that fire? So we have to be able to link it all the way through. So for those who remember, that fire started on the 7th of February. We were still investigating that in June that year. And one of our investigators called me up and said, Les, I'm struggling here. He was actually from Swan Hill, so we had investigation all over the state on a bit of a roster. He said, I've got this white stuff coming down on me here. I've never seen it before, but it's actually making it very difficult to investigate. I said, Travis, it's probably snow. And sure enough, it was. So we had snow covering the fire ground, which so at that stage there, we'd firstly linked it all the way through to Marysville anyhow, so we had to finish it up at that stage. So, but we were pretty comfortable at that stage. We linked it all the way through to Marysville. So that's some things we have to do as well to link that all the way through from where the fire started. Particularly if there's been any fatalities, we need to be able to link that all the way through. So that's some other things that we do as fire investigators. Look, something I should have said right from the start. So if you have any questions as we go through, just fire them at us. Sometimes it's easier to ask them as we go through. If you've got a memory like mine, when we get to the finish, you'll probably have forgotten them. Or if you want to write them down a bit of notepad, like Stewie's listening in, my captain at Campbell's Creek here, he's like me, he's pretty fair-headed sort of fella, and generally us older guys, memory's not so good, so if we either ask at the time or write them down so we don't forget them. Younger ones are probably okay, so you'll still remember at the end of the session. But yeah, feel free to ask any questions as we go through. All right, just a little bit on who's responsible for what areas of the state for fire investigation. So we do have some procedures. There's pretty much an agreement between, which I'll go into shortly anyhow, but each of our agencies have our own areas of responsibility. So you can see on the map here, we've got the green areas, and thanks to Sarah, couldn't track down a map of the new Fire Rescue Victoria boundaries. The old Melbourne one was actually easy. It was a 16-kilometre radius from the old GPO, where it used to be in the middle of Melbourne. That was the MFB zone, but that's now all changed, and Fire Rescue Victoria, all the little green spots on the map is where they have responsibility for. So each agency, each area has its own little patch, and we are responsible for doing the fire investigations on our own patch. But in saying that, we all do the same training. So actually, in fact, we run our training here in Castlemaine, which is pretty much where I live. And we don't run it here just because I live here. We run it here. It started before actually I got even involved with the training. It was actually considered a good area as far as we do our training in November, and the climate's generally quite good, and the fuel types here are quite suitable for that time of year. So that's why we do the training here. So the training is the forest fire management people, it's CFA, it's what was MFB, and now be Fire Rescue Victoria, and also police. So generally, police detectives and the police arson chemists come along and do the training. It's a small group of us that actually run that training group made up of forest fire management people and CFA people who actually run that training. So I actually have a dual role. So my principal job is investigating fires with DELP, or Forest Fire Management. We do get fires, but I'm also a volunteer investigator with CFA. So I do some for CFA as well. But in saying that, we right across the state, we help each other out. So I've done investigations pretty much right across the state. When we can't get investigators for both agencies, and often DELP can't find a fire investigator in their patch, but CFA will have one close by. So we interact with each other because we all do the same training, so it makes it so much easier to do that. So even though we've got our own areas of responsibility, and the JSOP actually says the agency who have the responsibility for suppression of where the fire started are the agency responsible for conducting the investigation. So if I am doing one, or say a forest fire management person's doing one on behalf of CFA, that they will do it under CFA systems pretty much. Yeah, so the FRV areas are defined on the map at DELP. Sarah explained earlier between DELP and forest fire management, but we look after all the public land areas, so state forests, national parks, and protected public land. And CFA have got virtually everything else. So their definition of the country area of Victoria is in fact, I haven't actually seen the new definition now. It comes to Fire Rescue Victoria, but I'm pretty sure it was, because old days used to say everything outside the metropolitan area, excluding state forest, national park, and protected public land. So I suspect that the Act will just change to say everything outside the FRV area, which is not national park, and blah blah blah. The rest of it's that's their areas of responsibility, which can also be important if we want to go to court when we charge somebody. If somebody's committed an offence, it's really important we actually understand which piece of land it's actually taken place on. Because with the exception of a total fire ban, it's actually tenure blind. It's just by the TFB zones. But apart from that, if it's not a TFB, if the offence takes place, and one of the issues I do have quite often with coppers, particularly coppers that come out of Melbourne, everything gets out of Melbourne, they say is a country area of Victoria, so we have to charge them under the CFA Act. Even if it takes place on a national park or state forest, they want to charge them under the CFA Act, which is incorrect. So if we did charge them and we had a half-smart barrister, for defence barrister, they would actually get them off the charges fairly quickly. So, all right, so getting into what we're meant to be talking about tonight, which is about how can first-on-scene firefighters help fire investigators. So a few dot points I've got there. So, and what we will try and do when we get there is try and talk to the first-on-scene crews. And sometimes that's not always that same day. I've often rocked up to fires, a day or so later on. So I've got to try and track down who were the first responders so I can ring them, have a talk to them, or preferably get them back on scene if we can, and get us to go through particularly where the fire was when they first arrived. It can be really important. Which way was the fire going, and also the wind, the direction of it. So I've got the little question there, does fire always travel fastest with the wind? So if you're a flat country person, it generally is. But if you're from the mountains, that often will get slope, will dominate the forward rate of spread of the fire greater than what the wind does. So you can have smoke going one way, but the fire is actually going in a different direction from where the smoke is. And particularly if there's a rough rule of thumb I've worked out the years is a 10-degree slope, which is about probably the maximum sort of steepness you see on in a township type area, a sealed sort of road. Those really steep streets you find, it's about 10 degrees, and then 20 degrees is just okay for four-wheel drives, and at 30 degrees, too steep for four-wheel drives, and just okay for bulldozers to work in, about the colour for bulldozers. And when you're walking up a 30-degree slope, you really know you're walking up. So 10-degree slope has a sort of similar effect on rate of spread of about 20 k's an hour of wind. A 20-degree slope's worth about 40 k's an hour wind, and a 30-degree slope's worth 60 k's an hour of wind. So yeah, if you've got a fire burning at a 30-degree slope, it's got to have a very strong wind to counteract it. So most times the fire itself will actually run up slope, but the smoke might be just going downwind still. So it's interesting trying to plot those fires. You got all your head fire directions indicators going one way, but you also got spot fires going in a different direction quite often to where the main fire is going. So it makes it harder. So what we want to try and do is pick your brains as much as we can to make it easier for us. And what we do, there's some principles of bushfire investigation are sort of similar to structure fire investigators, but some other things are complete opposite. So with a structure fire, they're looking for the hottest part of where the fire started, and the hottest part of it, the deepest charring. Whereas in bushfire investigation, we're actually looking for the least intense part of the fire. So for those who have done any burning and stuff, remember when you first put down one little spot, it burns quite slowly to start off with, and then gradually builds up some steam and gets hotter as it burns away from that little point of ignition. So we sort of, we want to start out, we don't actually start our investigation at the cooler spot. We actually start our investigation in a nice run of fire and work our way back to that cooler spot. I remember doing a job in Gippsland a few years ago where the time I got there a couple of days later, the fire was about 80,000 hectares. So in theory, you sort of start at the other end of the fire and you work your way back. So the fire already burned about 30 kilometres or more at that stage. So I wasn't going to walk back 30 kilometres and track all the fire all the way back, particularly in that steep, unfriendly country. I come from a civilised part of the state where our hills are fairly gentle and civilised. So what I did is I tracked down the first on scene crews, and got them to come back and show me where the fire was roughly when they first got there, and then which direction was it going. It was interesting. It was a steep slope, and we've got fire going one way and wind going a completely different direction because it was so steep. And it varied from about, I think that stayed from about 28 degrees through to about 35 degrees. At 35 degrees, it was actually even unsafe to walk on because it was fairly loose, sort of rocky type country. So it was actually unsafe to walk on when it was 35 degrees. So in effect, those first on scene crews saved me probably pretty much weeks and weeks of work and made my job so much easier. So yes, that's the thing we want you to do when you first rock up. And if you actually can take some photos, I know we sort of hammer in forest fire management, we sort of hammer our crews a bit not to be on the phones and taking photos and things like that. But when you first get there, a couple of photos can be so valuable for a fire investigator. So if you can actually do that without compromising your initial attack. So if you're on the tanker rocking up, There's a few areas there. If one person can take a few photos, that would be extremely valuable. So some of that stuff can be really important for fire investigators. I remember talking to one of our old investigators who said, some of the first on scene crews had taken a photograph of when they first got there, and the fire actually started by power lines, and there was a fault with them. There was no spreaders actually on the line, and the photograph actually showed that. But a couple of days later, time the investigator got there, the power company had actually been there and fixed it all up and put it all back together where it actually should have been. And they're saying, oh, no, we've got no fault here, nothing to see, sort of thing. Whereas when those photographs taken by the first responders actually showed there actually were no spreaders on that power line. So some of those sort of things can be really helpful for us. And while you're there, you're quite within your rights to a few happy snaps all the way around. And if there's some actually people in the area and there's some vehicles there as well, if they happen to be turn up in your photos, that would be really good as well. Don't make it obvious, but you're quite within their rights to take photos of anybody that's out there that's not in the private location, unless they're actually in a house or a toilet block or something like that. We can take photos of them. That's very useful as well. I can remember one job over at Maryborough a few years ago. We had this young fella kept turning up at all our fires, and the fires were in some public land just behind some houses. So eventually one of the guys goes, I reckon I've seen this young fella at a few separate fires here, so I might just go and ask him a few questions. So I rocked over and said, what can you tell me about this fire, young fella? He said, yeah, I can tell you all about it. He said, I reported it. He said, how did you report it? And he said, this was back before we had pages and things. He said, when we used to work through the FRS system, he said, oh, I rang the FRS number. He said, well, how do you know that? He said, oh, I've got it pre-programmed in the phone at home. He said, I just rang it. He said, oh, well, you don't happen to have any matches in your pocket, do you? He said, oh, no, but I've got a cigarette lighter though. He said, oh, good. I think we better take you home and have a talk with Mum and the police. So, so some of those little observations that our first responders can make can be extremely valuable for our fire investigators. So, and when it comes to putting the fire out, when you get there, it's pretty rare that you will get there and find the fire is still at the point of ignition, or what we call the point of origin. So there is no harm in squirting water on the flames. If you can do it parallel with the edge, so not having too much overspray, that would be great. It makes our job so much easier. And I'll show you some of the indicators we use and how easily they can be damaged if we spray too much water about. So, but don't be afraid to put the fire out. So it's in the bush, we get people to just put a rako trail out and not actually touching the flames, but there's no problem squirting water on the flame itself. And then again, early, if you can actually, does the fire appear to be suspicious, or is there no obvious cause? Well then, very quickly if you can, call an investigator. So often they get forgotten about until everything's over and everything's been washed away, and we decide to call an investigator, and often that's actually too late. So. All right, so have a quick look at that photo there, and time to actually get to put that fire out. Time we run it around. Probably those two fires have probably joined up. It just looks like one fire. So, to a fire investigator to actually see that, time we get there is probably all joined up, and there's actually one fire. So, just those little things like that can be so obvious. So by having a fire there, we've got two separate fires. All of a sudden, we start to think, well, Jingo, something a bit funny going on here. We've got two separate fires out in this forest. And for those who remember Black Saturday and the Churchill fire, where Brendan Sokoluk was actually charged with lighting that fire. I think he got 18 years jail for that, which was the biggest case we've ever had in Victoria, probably in Australia. That he admitted that actually, yes, he was at the scene. He was out. It was just a lovely day to go for a drive. Black Saturday, everybody just likes to go for a drive in the bush on a day like that. And he was actually out there parked on this little side road, and he decided he would actually have a cigarette. and the ash of his cigarette dropped onto the floor. So he got some tissue paper and he scooped it out the door, and that's what actually started the fire. Um, but what the investigators actually were able to do was they actually traced that back. By the time they got there, it was just one big fire and going like crazy. Time anybody else got there was one big fire going like crazy. But the investigators were able to actually prove there were two separate seats of fire. They traced two runs, and I think about 100 metres apart. So that sort of sunk Mr. Sokoluk. But yes, I can understand perhaps there's a 1 in a million chance that what he said was actually true in the first place, how he'd scooped the ash out onto the ground that started the fire, but to actually do it twice in 100 metres, it's a really good effort to be able to do that. So the jury didn't buy that story. So, and I've spent a little bit of time in court with cases over the years, and something you think's a pretty cut and dried case, when you get into court, it's very, very different. So for us, the prosecution, we have to prove everything beyond reasonable doubt. Whereas defence, all they need to do is actually put some doubt in the minds of the court that somebody else, there could have been some other reason how this fire started. That can be enough to for us not to be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that this the way the investigators said the fire started. So we've got to be very, very careful in everything we actually do. It's just amazing what gets thrown up to just try and put some doubt in the minds of the court. So you get just unbelievable stuff that actually does come up. So if we've got a fire like this, we've got a photograph from the early first responders that shows two separate seats of fire. Yet the person might say, "Oh, look, I started with a cigarette," or something like that. And I say, "Well, how can we actually got two separate fires at the stage?" Well, that's extremely valuable to us when we go to court. So if you have taken those photos, please let the investigators know, or your captain know, so they can pass it on to the investigators, or when the police get involved, can be passed on to them. Extremely valuable for us. And even just taking some notes that can be really valuable to us as well. So if we think it's suspicious in any way, as soon as we've got the fire sort of contained, we can, if we can, tape off the area. All our appliances should actually have the scene tape there to tape it off. But the area of origin is not always obvious, and particularly if it's been a day where it's been relatively cool, there's not much wind, the fire's will go in all different directions. It's not always obvious where the area of origin is. And sometimes it actually is. It's extremely obvious. You can look up and see a distinctive V pattern coming back from where the fire started. So sometimes it's obvious, but not always. But if you get there and the fire's not overly big, and it does actually take a bit of a run, you eventually get it out, you can come back, and if you can memorise pretty much sort of a rough idea where it was when you got there, if you can put some tape down in those areas, can make our job so much easier. And similarly, if there's any wheel tracks that could be there, and next trailer trucks come along and they're actually going to run all over the top of that, so if they can be protected as well, is really, really great. Most of you are probably not like me. I'm a bit notorious for everywhere I go. My wife goes crazy at me. Everywhere I go, I will carry a notepad and a pen with me. And I suppose it's just the type of work I do. I come from an investigative background. Well, I've been doing it not just fire investigation, but a lot of other investigations for many years. So it's just a habit I get into. I'll take notes on things. So again, particularly younger guys might be okay. You've got good memories, but for us old guys are getting a bit thin on top. Take some notes and do it while it's fresh in your mind, and that's actually what's called contemporaneous notes. When you go to court, that's actually acceptable. You don't actually have to take them there at the time, but you have to take them while the events are still fresh in your mind. So take yourself a few notes, because in a few days' time, I actually went to the coroner's court last year, I think it was, or maybe the year before, for a fire I investigated about 5 years previously. So yes, it's amazing. Some of those things when they actually come up, and they're going to test your memory. And for me, I'm flat remembering what I did yesterday, let alone 5.5 years ago. So I really have to rely on my notes. So just those little notes you can take can be really helpful. Next little point I've got there is if you got 5 firefighters on the back of a truck, do they all see the same thing? And is it bad if they don't? So the answer is probably very rare that if you actually had five firefighters back of a truck and you rocked up and we interviewed them all separately, they could give me 5 different versions of what they saw when they got there. And it's not because they're telling lies. It's just because we all see things in a different light and different ways. So don't be concerned if what you see is different to somebody else that's on your truck. The last thing we actually want you to do, if you think it's suspicious, is get together and collaborate and all come up with the same story, because I can tell you now, if you do, the coppers, when they come, they'll actually take a statement from you. The first thing they say is, hang on, there's something funny going here. I've got 5 people telling me the same thing. That's bullshit. That doesn't happen. Well, very rarely does it sort of happen that way. So we all see things differently. So don't sort of be afraid that they're saying, well, shit, I saw something different to what my colleague did, and that's quite common. So yeah, and that doesn't matter if they get 5 different versions. They'll eventually sort their way through that, and they accept. We understand that we do see things differently, and each of us have got better recollection. I know my wife is really good on detail. She can tell you, you drive past a car, she'll tell you what colour it was and the description of the people in it and things like that. Whereas I'm hopeless, particularly for Blake and my job. I should be better than that, but that's just how we're made up. We all got different DNA, and that's what they allow to use DNA in courts. Because we all have DNA, and we all have different makeups. We all see things a little bit different. And is there any potential witnesses there that, if you actually can get their names, or at least a description of them, can be very valuable. So if that person's there, the last thing we want to do is treat them as a suspect. So, but they may have actually seen something that can be very, very useful too. So I'll give you a couple of examples. That one job I actually rocked up was one of those ones where they had actually done a pretty good job of putting the fire out when I got there, a bit too much. And but I did say to them, well, look, there's not much I can do here, but did anybody see anybody when they first arrived? And they said, oh, yeah, that girl over there that's just walking away, she was actually here when we first got here. So I sort of raced off after and caught up with her. And, again, you don't want to treat them as a suspect. So I said, look, my name's Vearing, I'm the fire investigator. Have you actually seen anything here? What can you tell me about this fire? She said, yeah. She said, I was walking through here and there was 2 little kids. They seen me and they took off. I said, well, which direction did they head? She said, oh, over towards those houses over there. So that's fine. So I go over and I start doing a door knock. And but the second house I got this lovely old lady. I said, look, I'm looking for a couple of young boys, their age about 10 and 12. Do you know if they actually live here anywhere? She said, oh, yeah. She said, those lovely little boys. She said, they came into my place and wanted me to report the fire. And they said they'd been trying to put it out. So asked me to report. So I reported it. And I gave them a drink of water. And I said, oh, you don't know how they live, do you? And she said, oh, yes. She said, they were so tired, I drove them home. So she got me their address and all sorts of things. And in the meantime, we'd found a box of matches actually about 10 metres away from where the fire started. So I've got the details and took it around the police with the evidence and stuff as well. And I've got around the police station and given the address, and the cops are gone, oh, not those little bastards again. So just those little observations that you can do as first responders can make it so much easier. And those little kids have been causing quite a bit of mischief around town from not only lighting that fire, but I think they've been causing a bit of mischief as well. So it's really useful. So. All right. So some of the things that you can do to make our job really hard. So drive over the area of origin, and again, when you first rock up to a job, often to start on the side of the road, that's the easiest place to access the fire. So sometimes that's just going to happen, and we just say, well, shit happens, and we move on from it. But yeah, it can make our job really hard once we've driven over the area of origin. But we don't want to, particularly on a bad day, we don't want to compromise our initial attack on the fire. If it's a cool day and the fire's going nowhere, well then, yeah, we need to be a bit more careful. But on a bad day, our first priority is to put the fire out, and we'll worry about the investigation second. But sometimes you'll start to get a few fires, like a bit of a pattern of perhaps an arsonist that's working in the area. And a lot of arsonists, Brendan Sokoluk's pretty rare. That he lit that fire on Black Saturday. A really, really bad day. But from my experience, and I've been involved with investigating a lot of arsonists over the years, and most of them will actually light them on cool days. And it's not that common to have them light on bad days. But in saying that, there are some arsonists who will start lighting fires. They might just start lighting a rubbish bin fire, and then it might get to a big skip bin, and then it might get to a bit of scrub, and then it'll just slowly get bigger and bigger. And as they start losing the thrills from that, they'll start escalating, and then they might start lighting fires on bad days. So, but it's pretty rare that the first fire somebody lights it on a really, really bad day. So for most days, we've got time. We can actually take a bit of time and try and protect the origin without actually driving over it. So again, once we've got the fire out, that's fine. We can actually call the investigator, but then don't go spraying water over the rest of it. And I'll show you some examples how we can bugger it up pretty easy by doing that. And similarly with dragging hoses, walking through the area of origin, picking up or touching any potential evidence. I know one of guys I do a fair bit of work with was so angry at the fire, this guy rocked up and said, "Oh, look what I found. This looks pretty obvious, isn't it?" He said, what do you want to do with me? If you've got a garbage somewhere bag, I can put it in sort of thing. And Brett said, yeah, there's one in the back of my truck, and while you're there, you can put it in that and just take it straight to the bloody tip, because it's not going to be much good for court now. They couldn't even tell me where it actually picked it up from and exactly where it was. It's contaminated. It's now got that person's DNA on them. So unless you actually want to go to court and explain to the court how you actually came to actually have any evidence in your possession, and be prepared to get DNA and fingerprint and everything else for that, please don't touch any evidence, and try and protect it as best we can so nobody else touches it as well. Again, particularly for fires in the bush. In fact, I actually, as Sarah said, I work as over summer quite often as a level 3 incident controller and ops officer, and train people in some of those sort of roles, and particularly at sector commander level. And I often say to people that we should be doing more parallel attack, and we should be actually burning things out as we go. Keeps our lines nice and straight. It puts the control lines where it suits us, not where it suits the fire. And we should be doing more of it to make it easy for ourselves. So if we do that, again, you don't need IC approval. It's just burning out. It's not back burning. It's burning out patches. But for Christ's sake, tell the fire investigator, because they're going to start walking along this control line. They're going to look and say, "Geez, one spot here, another spot here, another spot here. Shit, we've got an arsonist here. Where this fire's been lit in a number of different places along this track." But it may well be that's just that you guys have actually burnt that out to make it easy. Instead of waiting the fire to come out that track, we actually bring it out to it. And that's what we actually should be doing. But yeah, just make sure we actually let the fire investigator know that's what you've actually done. So, another thing is, don't report any illegal fires, or whether it's actually a burn off, whether it's a campfire, it's a grinder, or anything like that at all. To just let people get away with things, because it doesn't help our cause in the long run. So yeah, anything we think is an illegal fire of any description, again, make sure that gets reported through the system. And yeah, just things like illegal campfires who rock up and you might want to put them out. That's well and good, but those people don't learn much from that. So if we can actually make sure it gets reported and actually follow that through, we've got less chance of that actually starting all those people starting a fire next time. So it's all about the interagency agreement we actually have. So that's how all the agencies work together. So we've got signatories. So Emergency Management in Victoria, part of that, CFA. Well, actually, it's still actually my slide's slightly out of date. It still says MFB, but actually, it's still actually MFB. Actually, still are the signatories on. It hasn't been updated yet. So some stage we'll get around to updating that. We've got ourselves in Forest Fire Management Vic. And EMV twice there, lucky. Energy Safe Victoria, so again, anything to do with power lines or gas, we have an obligation to report those through to Energy Safe Victoria, so particularly power lines from bushfire perspective, really important that has to be reported to Energy Safe Victoria. And one big job I did that I believe was actually started by power lines, that the first thing I do is, I believe it was started by power lines, so I notified Energy Safe Victoria and got them out there and got them to verify, yes, this tree had been touching that power line, and yes, that is what's actually caused this fire. So in that case there was a civil litigation against the power company, and there was something like about a $10 or $11 million payout from the power company. So they hadn't maintained their line clearances properly on that line. So and that's one of the best deterrents you can actually get, because the power companies are all privatised these days, and the least amount of maintenance and work they can do on their lines, in theory, the more profit they make. So they can, pretty easy want to cut back on doing maintenance. If we actually let them get away with it, they'll just keep doing it, and they'll just keep starting more and more fires. So in that case there, I got Energy Safe in very quickly, because if I'd gone to court and said, Your Honour, this fire started by the power lines, so the defence barracks are going to turn around and say to me, well, Mr. Vearing, you're some sort of electrical engineer, are you? You got qualifications in that? I've looked at your CV, and it looks like you got kicked out of school after about bloody grade 3 and told never to come back again. And all of a sudden you rock up in the court here and you're telling us you're some sort of electrical engineer. So all of a sudden, our whole sort of investigation is pretty much blown out of the water, because I've made some assumptions. Said, oh, yeah, it's got to be power lines that started right here, but I'm not qualified to actually say that. So we got Energy Safe Victoria, and they looked at the tree, looked at the fire and the power lines. We got in, had a good look at it. I got a helicopter in, photographed it really close. We could see the tree had been rubbing on it. So they actually provided a report, and so that actually finished up, got settled out of court, because we actually had a good fire investigation report that tracked the fire back to the point of origin, and we actually had Energy Safe Victoria saying that that tree had started that fire. So it didn't even get contested. It was settled actually out of court. Whereas had I not done that, there's no doubt it would have actually been contested, would have gone to court. There's a fair chance we would have actually lost the case, and the power company walked away and said, ha, 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 there you go. We won't bother doing more maintenance. And we don't have to. It'll save us a lot more money. So whereas they got had to pay out over $10 million, so they're going to look and say, oh shit, if this keeps happening, we're going to cop a lot of money. We better start doing some more maintenance. So, work safe involved, because sometimes we do get casualties if it's a workplace where it actually happens. VicPol, the obvious partners in it, as is the coroner, who has to investigate all fires that actually where fatality takes place, or potential, or the coroner can actually elect to investigate any fire that's actually within the public interest. So they might take it on, and the police will actually prepare that report for the coroner. So, and the IC, some of you actually there will be ICs. So even if it's a small local fire, you're the IC there. You are responsible for initiating the investigation and getting on to duty officer to arrange for a fire investigator to attend. And if the fire is suspicious or deliberate, or we're not quite sure, we think it could be, or it involves a fatality or a possible fatality where somebody's been taken to hospital, VicPol will become the lead agency for the investigation, and the fire agencies, us fire investigators, we provide support, determine the origin of the fire and the cause of it as well, if possible. All right, so how we work. So you see these funny guys running around, head down and bum up. and playing around with flags and stuff, thinking, what the hell are these idiots actually doing? So the first thing we do is we'll do a bit of appraisal area. We'll walk around. We don't rock strap the fire. We have a look at it. We might talk to you guys and see if we can get an indication from you where the fire was when you got there, which way it was going, a bit about the fire behaviour. Do that, then we'll do an external examination. Often we might walk around, fire's not too big, we might walk around twice, one way and one the other, and often we can pick up little things just so as we're walking along. We're looking for the char line of the trees, so we get a feel for when the fire's actually spread and it's increased in flame heights. We'll look at sort of broader indicators. Often we've actually even found things like matches and cigarette lighters being disposed of, some other bits of evidence that's been disposed of, or even sometimes we've even found some other small fires that have been lit. And particularly with kids, they might light one that goes out, and then so they go and light another one 2 or 3 times before actually they get one to burn. So we can actually find a little fire that's only 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres in size. It'll be exactly the same cause as the big ones. We don't even have to investigate the big one, we just have to investigate the little one. And if there's no obvious cause in there, how it started, it'll be a cigarette lighter, and the other fire will be a cigarette lighter as well, pretty much. So we look for those sorts of things. Or any evidence we might find. So once we've done that, we'll go on to internal investigation. As I mentioned earlier, we'll start of an area of higher intensity and work our way back to an area where the fire is actually at its lowest intensity, which is generally where the fire started. And it's generally a fine line between there and the backing fire, which has been cool as well. And we use flags. So these little flags, the different colour flags. We'll have head fire. We'll have red flags. The flank fire, which if we can track a flank fire, we'll put in some yellow flags. And the backing fire, we put in blue flags for that. And any evidence we find, we'll have a white flag for us. That's just something job I actually did down towards Gisborne a number of years ago. And you can see I've got a series of red flags going down through the middle of it. And that's looking back towards the area of origin. And you see some yellow flags on the right-hand side there, which where the fire actually was a flanking fire, and the intensity wasn't as high on the flanking type fire. So that's the things that you'll actually see us doing. So what we often do, well, I do anyhow, when I rock up to a scene, I start my investigation, I start well back from the area of origin, and you might be there and be anxious to mop it all up so you can go home and champion a bit to get home. And I say, look, just give me a little bit of time and I'll work my way back. And I'll work my way down a certain way, and as I go down and put those flags in, I'll photograph them. Then I'll come back and actually pull them up and say, right, you can come in behind me, but just don't go ahead of my flags. Just keep behind me, and as I pull those flags up, you can start coming in and mop up behind me. So I know it's a painful process sometimes, but it can be very valuable, and it's going to cost you a little bit of time then, but hopefully down the track it'll save you a lot of time, particularly if you've got an arsonist working, or if it's power lines that's caused it. The more cases we can get against power companies, well, the more likely to do maintenance and the less likely we're going to get fires. And look, sometimes with an arsonist, in fact, most times with arsonists, they light fires on cool days, whereas power lines, in my experience, generally only happen on the hot, or particularly the windy days anyhow, so they cause most of our problems. And they're just as big an arsonist as people running around with matches in their pocket, and quite often worse because they're generally on the bad days. So even things like power lines, really important we find out the cause so we can try and lessen the chances of it happening again. All right, for those who got really excited and think they might want to be a bushfire investigator, and look, it is a good job. And that's pretty much my full-time job to some degree. I coordinate the fire investigations across the state for DELB. It is a good job. But there's a few downsides to it as well. So the prereqs we look for somebody who is an experienced firefighter, and they need to have a good understanding of fire behaviour, so understand how different fuels, different slopes, different winds affect the spread of fire. We need to have a good understanding of the rules of evidence and court procedures, because no good wanting to be a fire investigator if not prepared to go to court. And going to court can be extremely challenging. particularly there, you're could be there like as an expert witness for the Crown. So the defence is going to try and really critique everything you do and criticise everything you do and try and destroy your evidence. And it's not always a pleasant experience. They don't play fair, and they really attack the person rather than the evidence quite often, just to try and discredit you, and they'll try and find any chink in your armour. And actually, the more they can get into you, the more they get you rattled. The easier it is to you start agreeing with them and not be confident in your evidence. So yeah, so you actually be a little bit stubborn and pig-headed sometimes, and really prepared to go to court and be critiqued in court pretty much. So again, doing the field work is quite often the easy part. We need an aptitude for being a good investigator, but also that report writing skill as well, because for every hour you do in the field, you're probably going to spend 3 or 4 hours writing up the report when you're finished. And I know I've spent a week in court with one job I actually did. I think I spent 3 days doing the investigation. I probably spent a week writing, or probably over a week writing the report, and I had another week, over a week in court with it. So we do run a week-long training course, and after that week-long training course, you come out on L plates and you're mentored. And once you've submitted 5 good fire investigation reports, well, then you're ticked off as a fire investigator. So that's our training that we do. That's Brady Weg staff from Bendigo. The instructors and helps out at the course. So actually we light fires and watch them spread, which is a bit unique for particularly people in from CFA that rock up the fire. And the first thing you normally do is you want to put it out. You're not really interested in what the fire is really doing. Whereas the guys in green uniforms there that just doing a lot of burning, it's probably a little bit different for them. But it's quite a challenge just sitting back and actually watching fires the way actually they spread. But we learn so much more by just sitting there watching those fires spread from a point we light, and then see how it moves. And when it gets to a certain size, we're happy with it, we'll then we'll go and put it out. I'll have some crews in and put it out. And then the next few days, you have to go back and investigate all the fires the other crews lit. We don't actually know where they started. So it's generally a really good week. All right, some things that we look for that you might find useful. So generally as a rule of thumb, the faster the fire spreads, the stronger the indicators are. So that's actually the easier for us to investigate. But as we look through these next couple of photos, just think about how easily you could destroy those indicators there and really annoy the crap out of the fire investigator. So there we've actually been going for about 55 minutes. I might whiz through these fairly quickly, and we're probably getting over overtime. So I'll just go through a few of the obvious ones first and see. So this is probably one of the most easiest ones to destroy on us. That's clumpy grass. You can see so I can get my mouse to go there. You can see a distinctive line between the white and the black. So this is a head fire in grass. It's running this way. Height of fire just here, and this bit at the back here where it's blacker has been somewhat protected and hasn't gone through the same amount of combustion as this side here. So think about how much water it would actually take to just get rid of that. It's a fairly fine sort of clumpy grass. So yeah, it's virtually gone. Any bit of water in it, or it's pretty much gone. That's a very similar sort of clumpy grass, but we actually see it's black, sort of black all the way through. So that's actually a backing fire. It's actually back into that. And you can see it's back. Fire's been over here. It's back into here. We've actually got, you can see over here, we've actually got some sweep on this, and so it's actually swept in the direction of the wind. But it's actually, we've got no white and black on that, so it's actually a backing fire. So all these things we actually only learn ourselves. The original training come from America for this stuff, but because we light a lot of our fires ourselves and watch them spread and see what they do, with the training, we're learning all these things all the time. So that's a good one we picked up. So this is a backing fire where the fire backs back into here, and any clumps of grass that fall back that way get burnt. But if they actually fall back onto the black ground, they point back towards where the fires came from. So it gives us an indicator of backing fire. So here, you can spray as much water on that as you like, and you won't get rid of that staining on the rock. We've even tried to scrub it off, and it won't come off. So you won't destroy that evidence, but you can see on this side here, this rock, it's fairly clean burn through here. But on this side here, we've actually got a called protected field, where it actually hasn't burnt anywhere near as much. So our fires actually come spread through this way, and the rock there has actually sheltered some of the fuel there. So even on Black Saturday, we actually had good protected fuel. Even though it burnt really hot and hard, we still actually had this, not as obvious as this, but we're still getting protected fuel behind here. So again, that can be destroyed fairly quickly with a bit of water, or we drag a hose along and knock that rock out of place. All of a sudden we can have staining on the wrong side of it. Oops. And again, the burn and char pattern on our trees. So we'll actually have the fires actually burning. Well, what we actually know in this case is that the wind's been blowing from left to right of photo, because the fire actually wraps up the back of the trees. So it tells us the wind's been blowing left to right. So then we have to work out, well, actually, how do we know if it's actually a running fire or backing fire? Because you can still actually get similar stuff to that actually in a backing fire. That won't be quite as big an angle, but so then we look at actually the intensity of the fire. So again, this one here, we look at that, we can see it's a different type of tree, but same sort of thing. We've got that clear char line going at the back of the tree. And this one here is very obvious. It's actually, from the intensity of the fire, it's actually burnt quite hot. So again, we have to compare different parts of the fire to try and determine the intensity actually of it. And this one here, just to actually confuse everybody, which often happens with us. We can see a char line is going this way. That one there is going both ways. This one over here is going completely the opposite way. So that can happen sometimes. We get conflicting indicators, and that's quite often you look at somewhere, you'll find a patch of there's been some heads of a tree or some really flammable scrub somewhere, and all of a sudden we've got a really hot patch somewhere, and we've got a massive amount of convection, and actually drags all the wind back in towards it. So everything's not always black and white. So I might actually finish with this one, because we're actually getting on for an hour now. I think it's probably enough if you're starting to go to sleep. So this is probably the little gem you pick up when you're doing your external examination, and you actually can see the increase in the char lines on our trees. So nothing else. So you look at that and say, yep, our fire started back in here somewhere. That's not always the case, but it's like a good example of what actually happens when a fire first starts. It starts off with low intensity, it burns quite low, the char line on our trees is quite low, and then as it slowly spreads, or some days it spreads a bit faster, but as it spreads and gets wider, it actually builds up momentum, and then gets hotter and faster as it goes until it gets to, we call our quasi-steady state, and then it'll pretty much go the same speed from there on, provided our fuel, weather and topography doesn't actually change. So they're the sorts of things we're looking for when we do our external examination, those char lines on the trees. And again, it's easy here because we've actually got all the same species. You've got some stringy barks mixed up with some gum top barks or the peppermints, the platy barks. You can't actually compare different species. You got to compare apples with apples. So we compare the char line on all the stringy bark trees, and then we compare the char line on all the the manna trees, and do it that way. But we can't actually look at them side by side for the same species. So again, if you're in the bush, you need to have a little bit of understanding of different types of trees as well. So I actually might finish up there, Sarah, and hopefully giving people an indication of how some things we're looking for as fire investigators, and some things that you can do to make our job easier, and some things we don't want you to do to make our job really hard for us. So we might actually open up to any questions if anybody's got any.
Thanks very much, Les. Anyone got any questions for Les? You can either talk up or put them in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat there at all, Les.
No, I can't, Sarah. So
okay.
you might have to interpret for me.
No, I can do that. We've had just one response saying thanks. That was very interesting. We have no other questions, and I totally agree. Very interesting, very informative. I think people have learnt quite a bit. If there's no other questions, we might call it a night.
There was one. How long do you take to be a fire investigator? Did you miss that one, Seth?
Oh, sorry, Vicky came in afterwards. Thanks, Stu.
That was like to be a fire investigator. I guess it's that experience you have first, and then for the forest fire management people, they actually have to be authorised officers first. CFA will do a course that Nicole Harvey used to do, which I think is a weekend course to understand the rules of evidence and court procedures type stuff. And then you're nominated pretty much by the district. And generally, like we take 15 people per year. That's all the fire agencies plus police. So we don't get many people in each year. But those that do, some people will do their 5 scenes within a few weeks of getting out, and some people might take 5 years to get their 5 scenes up before they're actually qualified to go and work on their own. And sometimes I've had people send me reports, and I've rejected their reports saying not good enough. And I've spent a bit too much time in court over the years, and most reports go back with a fair bit of red ink on them, saying that one is set up in court, go back and redo it. So I'm a bit anal on some things that ones I mark, and I've done for both CFA and forest fire management. So yeah, it can take quite a few years for some people, and other people that are really active. If you're in a busy area, they'll get their 5 scenes up fairly quickly. And if you've got a good mentor working with them, that they can get to happen fairly quickly.
Another question we've got there, Les, is what do fire investigators feel about A-class firing?
No, well, actually, I don't have an issue with it at all, because in fact it's quite often. In fact, I'd actually recommend everybody actually use A-class foam unless you're in a sensitive area, even just for knockdown, because it does give you a lot better knockdown. Provided you just use it through your normal nozzle, it gives you a better knockdown and actually makes the fire stay down longer. Doesn't flare up behind you anywhere near as much. So if you can go and put down Class A foam around the edge of it, you probably don't need to use as much water. So the biggest enemy of probably fire investigators is too much water being sprayed around, particularly in the black areas. So if you spray as much water as you like on the red areas, but not on the black areas. So no, so foam, Class A foam doesn't really worry us at all.
Volunteer investigator, or are they paid positions only?
No, both. Yeah. So we do have. So if they have a number of volunteer investigators, in some cases I know a few of them actually retired coppers that got that aptitude right from the start. But there's actually others who actually aren't. The one guy is actually an electrician and all different sorts, but they generally have an aptitude for that type of thing. So I know another guy that. He works for the military, I think, but in investigative type stuff. So he's got that sort of background. So no, it's really there's a mixture of everything, really.
Another one there. Do you think CFA Preserve and Protect training has helped investigations?
Yes, it definitely has. Yep. And that Preserve and Protect incident scene is I don't think I've actually done a CFA. I actually developed the DELP one, that online course. But yeah, it just makes that awareness so much better. I think people who actually do that course are so much more conscious of what we do as fire investigators and some things that you can do to help us. So no, I'd certainly encourage everybody to do. I'm pretty sure you can do it online with CFA. I think. Sarah might just check that, and if you actually can't do it online with CFA, I'd certainly if we ever get back to normality, and if you haven't done the course, talk to training, your regional training staff, and see if there's somebody to come in and run it for the brigades. I know Brett Wagg's staff does a lot over our way. and so it's a really good course to have actually done.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll talk less. Neil, has it made arsonists more creative?
Sorry, Sarah, I was missed that one.
From Neil, has the internet made arsonists more creative?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm not convinced that we know enough about arsonists yet. And sometimes I think we only catch the dumb ones. And I think if we actually there is some profiling they can do on arsonists. I actually won't even talk about normally because it makes us too blinkered. And it's amazing over the years the range of people that we've actually had that have been arsonists. And once upon a time it was just all focused on young adolescent males, and that's definitely not the case. We've actually had a number of females who actually have been arsonists. We've actually even had one guy that was a former bank manager. He'd been a bank manager. He'd been CEO of a municipality. We've had coppers. Yeah, we've had fire people. Yeah, there's a whole range of people that make up arsonists. Yeah, I think sometimes we only catch the dumb ones of them. But in saying that, I spend a fair bit of time in the arson squad with my job, and once we've actually started to get a bit of a pattern, we can normally track them down. But yeah, I haven't seen any sort of ingenious, but there's a. If we look at CFA records, that the number one cause of fire is undetermined, so we don't actually know sometimes if they've been deliberately lit or not. So some of those ones were gone down as undetermined, that may well have been, it has been a smart arsonist that's actually put something there and disguised it, whatever else, fairly well. So no, I think we've still got a long way to go as far as the profiling and understanding arsonists. And from my experience, a couple of rules of thumb I actually have is that with arsonists, that a couple of things about them, and most times there's some sort of underlying mental illness with them. And the second one I found out over the years is they're generally all lazy bastards, and they actually light their fires right next to tracks. Whereas when we go to the bush and the fire started by lightning, I've been to a lot of lightning fires over the years, and I've never ever bloody come across one that's conveniently started next to a track. They all start in the middle of no man's land on us, so that's a bit of a telltale sign sometimes as well. But yeah, but in all seriousness, it's something that's we've still got a lot to learn about arsonists, and some arsonists will talk about why they lit fires, and some actually some will tell you nothing at all, or tell you a whole stack of lies, and it's actually hard to know sometimes whether they're telling the truth or what. But generally there'll be some sort of underlying illness or mental illness with them.
Thank you. Another one from Vicky. Is there an opportunity to shadow a fire investigator to see more?
Seymour, yeah, I imagine there would be. There's again, we've got some volunteer investigators at Seymour, and I should actually know.
No. Sorry, Liz. It's to see more, not to.
Oh, I Seymour. Okay, to Seymour. Right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, often there is. Yeah, and look, what we actually say is. For our investigator, it should always work two up, so much easier for safety and just you can rattle things off somewhere else. But in saying that, I reckon 90% investigations over the years are probably on my own. So I might actually grab a firefighter and actually get them to actually help me, whether it's taking photos, taking my notes for me, or carrying my gear. And we often carry a bit of gear so they can actually do that. So yeah, if you're keen on it, find out who your local investigators are, and it will vary from person to person whether they actually want you to help or not. But yeah, certainly I don't mind it at all, and I guess that's why I work in training, both sometimes in a paid capacity, but often in a volunteer capacity as well, because I like teaching people things, and the more we teach people, the easier our job gets. So I'm more than happy to have people come along and tag along with me anyhow.
How much firefighting experience do you think is necessary before going into investigation?
So we used to always say like at least a crew leader type level, so they've actually got that sort of reasonable amount of experience. Trying to put hours on it is not always easy, but at least a crew leader, and we always say from adult perspective, done so it's crew leader level at least, and they've done intermediate bushfire behaviour, so they actually have a good understanding of fire behaviour.
From Bernie, Protect and Scene is on the online learning hub.
Great. Yep. So certainly encourage everybody to get on and have a crack at it.
How much arson do you feel is for purpose hunting, clearing, risk reduction, etc.?
Well, a true arsonist, if you actually look at the definition of arsonist, it's really what their intent is. So many things about arson, you actually have to improve it to sort of prove that their intent was to actually cause a bushfire. So as opposed to people who are burning off for fire protection purposes, or somebody who we certainly feel that there's some fires been lit over the years by hunters, whether it's deer hunters or duck hunters or whatever else, so to make better habitat and things like that. Better grazing if you're alpine grazier. We always felt there's been a number of those fires over the years, and we don't really class them as true arsonists because it hasn't been their intent to cause a destructive bushfire. So there's a fair variation across that. But I think the number of arsonists, we because the technology is so much better, and I won't actually go into some of the things that we actually do because they're a little bit secret, but and stuff that police actually get involved with as well with us. But some of the stuff that we can use, generally once we've got a bit of a pattern, it generally doesn't take us that long to track them down, or we don't think it does. And again, maybe we only catch them dumb ones. But so there's a fair amount of variation in that, and particularly in a forest perspective, we have a few fires that start particularly late in the season against private property. We actually think that somebody's actually doing it to protect their land. So in some degree they're arsonists because they're lighting those fires, but they're actually doing it with the intent to try and protect their own property rather than actually cause a destructive bushfire. But again, the people don't always understand fires all that well. Often they get away and it burns a lot more than what they originally anticipated. And my job I did this year was a guy who, when the big fires were burning in Gippsland, decided he thought his place was going to be threatened. So he decided he'd do some burning off around his property as the fire got close. The wind then changed and it got away, and then it actually became another fire on its own, and the main fire didn't actually even come down to his property, so he'll be charged with that. And I said to him, well, mate, we wouldn't be lighting fires and we wouldn't be doing backburns like that. If there's a high fire danger, when there's a wind change coming, he obviously didn't have that access to weather and things like that we do. So he'll be charged with lighting that fire. So people don't always understand the weather and fuels like we do. So they often only intend to be a small fire and gets away and becomes a big fire.
Everyone else says, thanks, Les, that was interesting and informative. Thank you. I'll investigate, pun intended, further, from Vicky. Helen Davies, thanks for a great presentation as always. Hope to see you at the creek soon. Don't classify that as arson. What does he get charged with?
So
probably the last one was, if you don't classify that as arson, what does he get charged with? So
that guy will get charged with lighting a fire. He'll get charged under the Forest Act because in the marginal mile, so with lighting a fire without a permit. It's also happened to be a total fire ban day, so he'll get charged under Section 40 of the CFA Act for lighting a fire on a total fire ban day. So,
just another one here. How should we be attending unattended campfires? How should we be treating them?
Yes, so something we're trying to really crack down. The year before last, we had something about close to 1,000 campfires that were illegal. Could have all, I think only probably over 100 of those escaped to become bushfires, but all had the potential to keep burning. And actually, if we didn't come across them and put them out, potentially cause a lot of bushfires. So we're sort of really trying to crack down. So we'll actually get them to put it out. If they don't, we'll put it out ourselves. And then for us, we actually pass that information or get people to pass on to one of our authorised officers or go and interview them. From a CFA perspective, priority is to put the fire out, tell them to put it out. If they don't put it out, you put it out for them. But ring the local police, get any details you can, just the vehicle registration, any description of those people, and pass it on if it's on public land to the DELP duty officer. Or some private land or on the creeks, things like that, pass it on to the police. If you're a long way away from any DELP officers, then just go straight to police and request them to attend from the legal campfire. So otherwise, yeah, people just keep getting away with it, and at some stage, we're going to feed up with some big fires. And there's more and more people out the bush. I was doing an investigation to a job way back and behind Marysville, middle of no man's, between Marysville and Matlock, middle of no man's land. It was surely it was, admittedly it was a long weekend, but I could not get over the amount of four-wheel drives that are actually going up into the bush on the weekends. So more and more people get up there and actually camping. And so, whereas in the old days, when I started the job, which was about 1979, the only people who had four-wheel drives were us. Back in the Forest Commission days, no one else, or very, very few people had four-wheel drives. And it's just amazing how many people out there on the weekends these days. And we're getting more and more fires caused from illegal campfires. So we've got to start cracking down, otherwise it's going to come back and bite us on the bum. So yeah, either DELP duty officer or police, but if you can certainly get some registration numbers, makes the job a lot easier.
Yeah, as a brigade, we've been checking our local with Rocklands Reservoir here up near Balmoral, western side of the Grampians. We go for drives around it on the busy periods during the summer, whereas a lot of people camping, and quite often you come across unattended campfires where people have packed up and left the fire going, and no vehicles about, no one about, and the fire's still burning and still hot, so to speak.
Yeah, and they just pack up and go back to Melbourne, wherever they come from, and the next day it could be hot and windy, and all of a sudden you get sparks coming out, and then you got a bushfire you got to attend with. So no one there. There's not much we can do about it. But again, report it to the DELP, which will. Sometimes it's amazing. We might have some cameras out the bush sometimes, and we might happen to see some. Check on those, and we might find this. Registration of a vehicle that's been in that area. So still pass it on to the DELP duty officer, even if there's no one actually in attendance. Just put it out first and then pass it on.
DELP crews may have already been out there earlier when the crews were actually camping, so they may have that information anyway.
Yeah, it's a good point, Sarah. They may have actually patrols and saw them there, and get a description of that vehicle. Yep, good point.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you very much. Oh, there you go from Clayton. Under our current state of disaster, we can ban campfires this year. That might be quite good.
That would be good.
Thank you very much, Les, for your knowledge and giving us all this information. I think everyone will agree. I think there's a few people clapping hands and thanking you. So thanks for your time and your effort. Thanks everyone for attending again. Next week we actually have an American on from Florida, I think she is. I'll have to double check. So I'll chat to her during the week, and that should be an interesting conversation too, and see what's going on over there at the moment. Have a safe week, everyone. Keep well, and we'll see you next week.